Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to Czechast, the podcast in English about all things Czech. If you've been listening lately, you know that I've been returning quite often to the topic of security and defense policy. Russia's war in Ukraine, NATO, military spending, these are no longer abstract questions. But this time, I wanted a different perspective. Not another former minister or veteran male journalist or academic. I wanted to hear from someone a generation younger, because ultimately, it is the younger generations who will live with the consequences of the decisions being made today. So, I invited Kateřina Gruntová, a Czech Radio defense reporter. For her, the starting point is simple.
They say there is no prosperity without security. And I think it's 100% true, and yeah, that's it.
So how long have you been doing this?
4 years.
Defense for 4 years.
From the very first day, I'm focused on defense and security.
But security is often misunderstood, especially when it comes to NATO and the often quoted fifth article of the North Atlantic Treaty.
It doesn't mean that automatically all these other members would come to our help with their armies. It means that they would consider whether and with what force they would help you. So it's not like
It's not automatically a declaration of war.
Yeah.
Well, it might be, but it doesn't mean that we will send an army to Portugal if something happens there.
Yeah, that's right. So if we don't try enough and we are not deemed as a reliable part of ally, they might not help us.
And perhaps most importantly, Kateřina reminds us that defense is not just about soldiers.
Defense concerns the whole of society, not just the army. It's still good to remember and repeat because it's true. And in case of a conflict, the government can call up us all to defend the Czech Republic. So we need to have this in mind and maybe just get ready for it, in your head, maybe.
So settle down with your coffee or tea, adjust your pace if you are walking or jogging. This is my conversation with Kateřina Gruntová.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And my name is Kateřina. I'm a reporter covering defense and security. And I have been working for Czech Radio for 4 years now.
What has your kind of journey been? How did you get to do what you do?
Yeah, I had really hard time figuring out what I want to do in my life. I always knew I'm interested in culture and history and languages, but I just didn't know what kind of job I could do. So I studied, marketing, then I dropped out, then I studied Russian language, then I dropped out. And finally I earned my bachelor's degree at Faculty of Education in Czech and history. And I was looking for a part-time job to, support my studies and myself. And a friend of mine at that time, he worked as a proofreader for a Czech newspaper called Mladá fronta. And so I did this part-time job, and this is how I got into this media world.
Right. So you kind of began your career, if I were to say, behind the scenes, working as a proofreader before moving into reporting. How important was that early, kind of less visible work for you in learning how journalism actually works, how it functions, and organizations such as Mladá fronta dnes? And maybe you can describe it a little bit for the listeners.
Yeah, well, it was very important for me because, as a proofreader, you read hundreds of articles, and So I understood what a good news story looks like, what an interview looks like. And after like 2 years of doing this, I just was ready to move into like producing the news, not only like correcting somebody else's work. So I applied to do an internship as a reporter.
Mm-hmm. So you got some kind of training during that internship, I would say.
Yes, it was like unpaid internship, and but they taught me a lot, like how to work with sources, where to look for information, and so on. So it was really helpful, and I spent there like 3 months. And after these 3 months, I started my job here at Czech Radio.
Let me just mention my own personal experience. I came to journalism relatively late. I think I was about 28 years old, and I got to the Czech television of all places, and I started working as a kind of night editor, not as an editor-in-chief, but I was editing news, etc. And what I appreciated much later on was when I came to the Czech service of the BBC, and I was trained, or only then, at the Czech service of the BBC, because they really have this marvelous training program. But my experience from Czech media, in other words, was that I was literally kind of, thrown into the deep water and start swimming, So how was it with you?
Well, it was kind of same, because they would give you some instructions and then you just have to do the work. And they see if you are like up for it or not, because not everybody has this like skill set, to be a good reporter. So yeah, they were like helpful, but they gave me a lot of space, to show what I am capable of.
You mentioned that you studied to be a teacher, I suppose.
Yeah.
Do you think it gave you something professionally as well? I mean, to have a completely different background rather than go and study journalism at the Faculty of, I suppose, Social Sciences?
Yes. Well, yes and no, because I have like only bachelor's degree, so I never got into teaching really. I know like a lot of history and Czech literature, but I don't know how to teach kids, because this is what they teach you when you study for your master's degree. But I think it's helpful to know some other things apart from journalism, because you can learn journalism by doing it, and it's helpful to have some different background, I guess.
You're a woman,
yeah,
and yet you decided to kind of specialize on defense and stuff like that. I hope I don't sound sexist, even by mentioning the fact that you're a woman and doing defense.
No,
why not?
That's fine. Yeah, there are not many.
But there are very few women, right, who do that.
Yeah, that's right. We are like.
So how did you? Where did that come from?
Well, I think it doesn't matter whether I'm a woman or a man. I just think security and defense is like hugely important area, and I always knew I want to cover this area. And they say there is no prosperity without security, and I think it's 100% true. And yeah, that's it.
So how long have you been doing this? I mean,
4 years.
Defense for
like
4
from
years,
the very first day, I'm focused on defense and security.
What were the most kind of interesting stories, or the most interesting, I don't know, whether scandals or stories that you followed, that you covered?
Yes, I think like you get to interesting places and you meet interesting people, and you can ask them like whatever you're interested in. They would just tell you like the worst thing which can happen is they would say, I won't answer this question. So I really appreciate this. And some of these like most important interviews, I think it was like, for example, the president of Lithuania, I think his name is Gitanas Nausėda, but it doesn't matter, or like former chief of military NATO military committee, Rob Bauer. Yeah, so these were like international guests or respondents I interviewed. And I'm closely following, the army and Ministry of Defense, and like relationship of like leading people of these institutions. This means like the Minister of Defense, which was Jana Černochová in the past, and Karel Řehka as the chief of the general staff. And they had like complicated relationship, and yeah, this is something I was following.
Yeah, they famously had quite a difficult relationship. Let me just ask you particularly about this. How would you describe that to listeners who've never heard of that? What was the conflict about?
I think there was like they did not match as people. There was like mismatch in their personalities, and also there was like this power struggle because he, as the chief of the general staff, he controls some things, and she controls other things, and they just couldn't, figure out who controls what, and this is where this clash came from.
You actually mentioned the general staff and the Ministry of Defense. I was working on a program that was related only slightly about the military, and it was about satellites, and how they are used, and for defense, of course, how important they have become. And it took about a week for the Ministry of Defense and the general staff to decide who's going to speak to me, because they couldn't decide whether I should speak to someone from the general staff or the Ministry of Defense.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. This is happening all the time.
Mm. Yeah. So is there a competition among the institutions as well? Yes, I think.
I would not say so, because, the minister is like superior to the general staff, but just sometimes it doesn't work, and this is the result.
Let me mention my own experience, because I also reported from some conflicts, and I visited several times Kosovo. And I remember once I was coming there with the then Minister of Defense, who was Mr. Tvrdík, long time ago, I have to say. And we ended up at this airport. We were waiting for a plane, and I was chatting with the Czech troops that were based in Kosovo. That was the reason why we went there, because they were Czech. Obviously, there was a Czech contingent in Kosovo. And they were so open. They were telling me, stories, and that they are there mainly for money, and that it's not so hard, that they are bored, if anything. And I just wonder, I'm talking about 2003. And I think that I assume that today this wouldn't happen, probably, but maybe I'm wrong. The military personnel, I think, are much more careful when they speak to journalists.
Yeah, I think one of biggest struggle I face is that I have to, gain their trust. And once you do it, it's fine. They would tell you things, but they are very cautious, and you have to prove that you won't cause them trouble. So yeah. I think it changed.
And what about the army in general? Because it's been now 4 years since the war in the very hot war. But the war in Ukraine actually started in 2014. But of course, the invasion, full-scale invasion, started 4 years ago. We hear about it all the time. There's talk we have to change. Europe has to adapt, because the United States is what it is now as a country, as an ally. Key ally. In your view, in your experience, has the army, the military, actually started changing at least?
Yes, I think very much, because over the past 3 or 4 years, they had significantly more money, more funding. So now they can replace their old equipment with modern stuff. And also they moved into this spotlight of the public, and so they are having much more intention now. And I also think the army is communicates differently. They are much more open to the public, and I think this shift in communication began under the previous chief of the general staff, Aleš Opata, and also current chief Karel Řehka deserves great credit for how openly he communicates with the public.
And when we speak about the chiefs of staff, obviously we've got President Petr Pavel, who not only was a chief of general staff, but also served in NATO. Do you think the fact that he's got this very strong military background, that it helps in any way?
Well, it definitely helps the army, when they need some advocacy. Someone who would
someone who would stand up for them.
Yes. So he definitely does this, and the answer is yes.
Obviously, defense spending, modernization, and readiness are now central topics, as we mentioned. But as someone who follows this closely, do you feel perhaps that the Czech defense policy is more reactive or more kind of strategic, looking into future?
Yeah, I think this is just so interesting question, and I think this has like many layers. Like at the Ministry of Defense or at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are like great experts who are, not all of them, but most of them are doing like fantastic job. And I think these like strategic documents like defense strategy or security strategy, which were published like 3 years ago, they are like great documents, very well written. But in politics, it is necessary to make compromises and concessions. And so on the one hand, we have great documents approved by the government, but on the other hand, the government doesn't always stick to these documents.
Right.
So it's complicated.
It's complicated, obviously. And now we have still a relatively new government, which is making it pretty obvious that they don't want to hurry with raising the spending on defense.
Yeah, actually they are making some cuts in defense spending when we compare it to the last government. So yeah, we will see.
I don't want to ask you about concrete people or naming someone. Do you think that within the army, within the military, there is kind of some pessimism when it comes to this government?
Soldiers would not ever say it out loud because they are not. Well, they can't, express their politics.
They would be unprofessional.
Yeah, but I think they are like just watching it and, praying that they eventually would give the money to the military, because we promised to NATO, and maybe we will get into this, but there's no such thing like we and NATO. It's like we are NATO, and if we don't do enough, then like nobody would take us seriously.
Yeah, as you mentioned that mentioned NATO. I mean, I wanted to ask you, since I was a correspondent in Brussels, and of course I was accredited with NATO, and I was under the impression, I'm talking about years 2006, 2007, so some 6 and 8 years after we joined NATO in 1999, and the feeling that I got, I will get to the question, was that Czechia became member of NATO in 1999, and that's it. Now we are in NATO, and it's finished. And then these 6 or 7 or 8 years later, I would be in Brussels. I would be covering the summits. It was kind of, you came there, you gave the microphone to the Minister of Defense usually, or Minister of Foreign Affairs who came there, or President if it was a summit, or Prime Minister. And they would say a few words, but everything was kind of settled. Of course, this was before the war in Ukraine. Is it still the same? Do you think? I mean, this kind of lukewarm relationship of Czech public toward institution like NATO.
Yeah, I think yes, because NATO is such a complex, complicated organization. Before I started working as a journalist, I didn't know much about it either, so I'm not surprised that people just don't care. But what I think is bigger problem is that politicians do not understand.
They don't understand it themselves.
Yeah, and how it works. So that's a problem. And I think one of biggest misunderstanding concerns how Article 5 of North Atlantic Treaty works, and it says. I was just going to ask you if you could explain that to the listeners. Yeah, it says an attack on one member is considered an attack on all, but it doesn't mean that automatically all these other members would come to your help with their armies. It means that they would consider whether and with what force they would help you. So it's not like
It's not automatically a declaration of war. Well, it might be, but it doesn't mean that we will send an army to Portugal if something happens there.
Yeah, that's right. So if we don't try enough and we are not deemed as a reliable part of ally, they might not help us.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I actually say it was a very useful experience for me back in 2003 when I was among a group of journalists who were invited by the US mission to NATO. And we spent a few days in Brussels, and they took us to Mons, where there's kind of operational center. And they were explaining how NATO works. So, for example, I didn't know that during the Cold War, for example, the bombers with missiles had to, I don't know how often they would have to fly in different regions of the world. In how many minutes, literally minutes, they had to be action ready. And now how it slowed down, and all the capabilities, military capabilities in the early, well, especially in late 1990s, I suppose, it all changed with 9/11. And now with the war in Ukraine, even more, how it works. Did you get a chance, to, work with NATO more? And do you find it open? At least it seemed to me that they were open to us, to my generation.
Yeah, maybe when you were like a Brussels correspondent, but I had to, self-study a lot. And I covered as a journalist a few of these summits, but it's like, as you said, it's very formal and you don't really see what's happening behind the scenes. So, no. But maybe our colleague Zdeňka Trachtová, who's foreign correspondent in Belgium.
Brussels, she's there now.
So maybe she would have a different experience.
We had a very good opportunity to speak to our then ambassador to NATO, who was actually an invited journalist for informal chats. It was off the record, everything. And I don't want to name him or her. Maybe, but he was very open, I have to say, and this helped a lot. Yeah, but I suppose, as you mentioned, if you build trust, even in the Czech military, if you go on that level, you get people talking.
Yeah,
as well.
Definitely. But off record all the time.
Off the record, yeah. You will be leaving Czech Public Radio
that's right.
for Seznam Zprávy, so you will become a colleague of Kateřina Šafaříková, who was actually guest of Czechast not such a long time ago. I'm just wondering, if I may ask, what made you, decide for this step?
Well, there was this opportunity to change job, and I decided to take it. And I'm like curious how it works elsewhere in other like media outlet. That's it. Basically.
But you will be on the kind of defense beat, yes?
Yes, I'll be focusing on defense and security. Even in Seznam Zprávy.
And I think that's a kind of good point to mention that. The Seznam Zprávy is a private organization, a private media organization. It's not public. And yet they keep this kind of specialization, still there, right? That was the agreement, that you got.
Yes, they were looking for someone who will be covering defense for them, basically. So, yeah.
Just one question came at the top of my head, came to me right now. Did you undergo any courses, special courses for, dangerous situations with the army?
Well, yes, but I didn't finish it. So, I spent 3 days this fall with the army. They are doing this course for journalists and NGO workers. But I got COVID there, so I had to leave. So I didn't finish it. But still, it was interesting experience. But
I was just going to ask you, was it fun?
Not fun, but it was definitely interesting, and nothing. It was like nothing I've experienced before.
So what did you do, for example?
Well, we were in this like military training area in Vyškov, and we had to wear our bulletproof vests. Yeah. So we were in this military training area in Vyškov, and we had to wear this bulletproof vest all the time and the helmet.
Which is quite heavy, the equipment.
And we just had to move in pairs. Like we had our body and we couldn't go anywhere without our body. So it was like you completely lost your sense of privacy there. And it was more about like resilience building and then learning some things you might encounter, like bombs, mines, and so on.
Yeah, when you mentioned bulletproof vests, do you know, probably not, how the Polish call, what it is in Polish? Kamizelka kuloodporna. Which, I don't know whether the listeners in English will get it, but it sounds very funny to us Czechs, I think. Kamizelka kuloodporna. And that's what I remember. And it is very heavy. I can attest to that. As a journalist, still in public service media, how do you personally think about kind of responsibility when reporting on defense and security, especially in the times of war in Europe, kind of, and heightened public anxiety?
Well, I think this does not apply only to like public service media, but to like all media outlets. And we have this great responsibility, like not to spread fear, but still at the same time tell people the truth. So, you know, you have to balance it, because politicians, they like to say like everything's fine, we are ready, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, well, when you talk to the soldiers, you know, it's not like this. So, yeah,
the situation is different.
Not even diplomats, not only soldiers, but, you know, all these other people who work for state and are not politicians.
If you look ahead, what defense or security story in Czechia do you think deserves more attention, for example, and is not getting the attention?
Well, as I said, I think that defense has moved into this spotlight now, so it's getting a lot of attention. Yeah. But I think the message that defense concerns the whole of society, not just the army. It's still good to, you know, remember and repeat, because it's true. And in case of a conflict, the government can call up us all to defend the Czech Republic. So we need to, you know, have this in mind and maybe just get ready for it, like in your head, maybe.
It's good that you mentioned that. I actually remember, because one of the last guests was Tomáš Petříček, former Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this is something that he pointed out, that we still don't get it, he thinks. I mean, in the society, some of us, we understand, you know, that we are really threatened, but a lot of people are not. So in other words, my question is, I mean, would you kind of agree with that?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the government or the army, they should provide more opportunities for people who want to get some kind of training, but they are not it's not possible for them to go through this like 6-week long training, which is like what it is now. So I would advise them to make some shorter trainings so that all the people who want to, you know, go through it, they can.
How big is Czech army? I mean, because a lot of people don't realize, you know, how what kind of numbers we are talking about.
Yes, well, there are like 28 or 29,000 soldiers, but in the army, it's like not all the soldiers serve in the army. Some of them serve like in the military police, you know. You know,
this question just sprang to my mind because not long ago I was working on this program which touched on the US military, and I was mentioning Fort Bragg, this big kind of base, military base. And at any given moment, there are 120,000 military personnel, different groups, different, you know, there's National Guard uses that installation as well, or the installations that there are. So basically 3 Czech armies, you know, in one military base.
Yeah, well, it's impossible to compare, you know, US military and Czech military. There's no point, I guess. Yeah.
Kateřina, is there something that I haven't asked about and you would like to mention when it comes to Czech defense policy, strategies, army?
I don't know, maybe one more topic which is not so much talked about came to my mind, and that is that these threats are interconnected, you know. And for example, climate change impacts security environment very much.
How?
Well, for example, our Czech special forces, they have been training their like Kenyan colleagues in Kenya, in Africa, for more than 10 years now. And sometimes when people learn this, they're like, wow, why in Africa? Why should we care about Africa? You know, and it's because if like there's like some, for example, terrorist group operating, people just don't want to live there and they leave. And if they leave, you know, they move somewhere else, and they can come to Europe, and that might cause some other problems. So I think everything is connected and we should look at it this way.
Those are great words. Well, thank you very much, Kateřina Gruntová. Thank you for your time and your answers, and good luck.
Thank you for having me, and good luck to you too.
That was Kateřina Gruntová, Czech Radio's defense correspondent, a younger voice in a debate often dominated by male political veterans and journalists. If you enjoyed this or any other episode of Czechast, please don't forget to like it, follow the podcast, or even better, share it with your friends. And if you'd like to explore more stories and interviews about Czechia, don't forget to visit radio.cz. I'm Vít Pohanka. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay curious, and until next time, as we say in Czech, naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.